could be a moral entitlement that people feel they have because of their moral beliefs. It could be illegal, and very often devolves to a legal entitlement, which is something that is perhaps guaranteed to them by a given Bill of Rights or Constitution. It could also be a customary entitlement that people observe owing to their freedom of religious adherence, for example. So there are a number of different kinds of rights that tend to get thrown into one pot.
What we do see is a lot of debate and a lot of discussion, a lot of discourse about rights. That doesn't mean that rights are not important, but what is equally important is whenever there is a discourse of right, there is an interlinked and an inseparable component of obligations or duties. So although I have a right to move my fist, but I also have an obligation not to hurt somebody's nose. So we really can't think of rights in isolation. It always goes and corresponds with the duties.
Rights entail obligations because, again, they cannot be exercised in a vacuum. If you have a right to something which libertarians call a positive right, then there's a duty on the part of others to supply something for that right to be exercised. If you have a right to vote, someone has to supply candidates in a ballot box, quite simply. If you have a right to freedom of expression, someone has, on what we call a negative right, someone has the duty not to interfere with you.
What the ancient scholars from India, the makers of the Shastras did, is they didn't emphasize so much on rights. They emphasized on obligations. And in an obligation itself, there was an embedded concept of recognizing and appreciating the right of somebody else.
Rights discourse hasn't followed the liberal path that many people in the 1940s expected it to take. And in particular, there are new conceptions of rights that are being articulated by postmodern conservatives and other nationalist groups, as well as China, perhaps because in an unmoored or untethered period where people feel increasingly unhooked from tradition, a sense of connection to those around us, we feel that rights, particularly rights guaranteed by the state, are one of the last preserves of stability in both a practical and even a kind of transcendental sense. And in these instances, the state or law, which assumes duty to its citizens, becomes a source of stability for many people in an increasingly corroded time period.
We got out of the state of nature, which was not pleasant, which was not peaceful, which was not Rousseau's noble savage. We got out of a brutal state of nature only by adopting a social contract. And that, in fact, imposes obligations on all of us. If I want my privacy and my liberty and my right to life and property respected, I have to do the same for my neighbor.
Of the exchange which was going on between Lou and Matthew, I was thinking to myself, there were two strands of it. First, there was unbelievable discomfort about the goodness of human mind. And that's why we have these artificial theories of nature or state of nature. That's where humans exist. And we have a great deal of faith in international institutions. So we are trying to have a system where we have a top-down model, where everything is decided by the so-called intelligent people and then thrusted down. Or we think of a system where there is greater participation. And I don't think, as long as nation states are making efforts to make their lot better, not interfering with their rights, there's no harm. Mere internationalism by itself is not good. Internationalism has to be for a purpose. There has to be a clear goal. If we don't have that goal, then it just becomes a self-entertaining enterprise.
It's group rights and toxic identity politics which have completely undermined individuality and absolved people of all responsibility. If you wake up in the morning and you look at other people and judge them all and only by their race, class, and gender, which is what the Marxists have done in the US, the ones that have colonized the left, then you basically destroyed individuality and individual responsibility.
The first starting point is we need to at least trust people. We are not trusting them to begin with. The whole premise of developing structures is that people are not good. And I have, over the years, come to a notion. I feel law is an anathema to morality. You need law because there is no morality. The more and more laws, less and less morality.
People need to learn to start looking at others as beings who have rich inner lives that are as important as their own, and that have something to offer us. One of the ways that you can start is by having respectful dialogue with them, right? By genuinely trying to find out what's going on in their head and to appreciate it for its own sake, rather than just trying to instrumentalize it and say, what can I get from you via this conversation? This is a process that we need to start inculcating in people from a very early age, right? And I don't think that's the way that we really educate people now. We tend to educate people by saying, you should look at life as a zero-sum game where you try to get as much as you possibly can from other people, most of whom are competition in our highly stratified society, and you want to beat them.
If you replace civics with political indoctrination, you end up with incivility and conflict and civil war, which is what we have in the US. We have a civil war raging now 30 or 40 years, and it's getting worse all the time. Moral education, when we teach ethics, we teach meta-ethics. We're teaching people that there are many potential answers to the question, what is good, what is right, what is just, but also it's not moral relativism, because we are saying that some answers function better than others in terms of the individual and the society and the polity.
One of the problems with the education system, the way the Western education system was structured, was of course to give knowledge and wisdom, but a great part of it was to train them for the workforce, of course, which has changed and transformed. It's a very crude analysis from the past. Of course, it has transformed over the years. But if the ultimate goal is to prepare somebody for employment, then obviously there is little to expect from the education and little to expect from somebody who is undergoing that education. We'd also need to rethink about fundamentally about the objective of the education system as well. If we have a higher goal, if we are producing good, moral, upright people, inevitably what will come out would be an inevitably good society. So education has an extremely important role.
I am optimistic, but always on guard against how the first 7 years of life have affected people's dispositions. If the first 7 years of your life have made you a happy and a good and a compassionate person, then you don't need too many laws and too many police. But if the first 7 years of your life have made you an angry, agitated, greedy person seeking retribution from your society and seeking punishment against others for your own alleged insults, then we need a lot of laws and a lot of police. I'm sorry to say, a human being is what we make of him and her. Let's make something good.
What I think we need to recognize is that we're in a period of transition and things are not set. What we want to do is move the world in a more rights-respecting direction where we renew civic friendship and we renew democracy, not one where we start to fixate on the things that divide us, which is the risk that we very seriously run today.
In conclusion, I think what one needs to keep in mind is rights as encapsulated by the law have a fundamental limitation. They will always have a limitation. And one can imagine very few things because rights by themselves in a constant evolutionary process, the challenges are going to change, the expectations are going to change. And as these keep on unfolding, the nature of rights is inevitably going to change. And if we wait for the state to recognize a right, then we are losing out on a lot of things. So there is a lot more ground to cover on the basis of morality, on the basis of moral training, on the basis of moral consciousness and awareness. And that's what we need to be looking at as a society for a sustainable world.